Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2016 comedy Pee-wee's Big Holiday. Now, this is not really a sequel, which is honestly a missed opportunity. There are references in terms of lines of dialogue to the other films, or there's a character from the first movie that makes an appearance, but I wouldn't necessarily call this a sequel. It seems like it's just a reboot. Another one of those films that's really relying heavily upon nostalgia for a certain IP and a certain character. In this instance, it's Pee Wee Herman. And at times that works, but at other times, it just feels like a pale shadow of what came before it. It's directed by a guy named John Lee. And John Lee, he did a bunch of stuff for Adult Swim uh, before this when it comes to his career. He did like Xavier Renegade Angel and a bunch of other Adult Swim projects. He also worked on Wonder Chosen for MTV. And the type of things that he did previously were very different when it comes to the tone and very different when it comes to the style of comedy or the style of direction. And you can kind of tell that he's more at home when it comes to making films that are more outlandish, that are more not necessarily offensive, but films that are definitely more edgy, or shows that feature more edgy content, not necessarily a Pee-wee movie. So what you have here is a director who is given a pretty tall task for his first film. This is his first feature film, as far as I know. And it's the return of Pee Wee Herman. And he's not really able to do the kind of stuff that he's really familiar with. So he's just kind of thrown in there and asked to do a kid's movie, which is not really what his forte is. And what you get is just a film visually that just lacks a lot of spark. At times, it's kind of there. You see a semblance of that spark when it comes to like the Rube Goldberg machine stuff in the opening of the film, and maybe a few other scenes that involve a dream sequence. But a lot of the time, you get shots and you get scenes in the movie that look very cheap, that look very flat, that don't have really a lot of the same energy that Paul Reubens is trying to bring to the scene and bring to the character of Pee Wee Herman. So you get direction that doesn't necessarily always match what Paul is trying to do. So what you have is a film visually that's very inconsistent, and I don't know where the $30 million budget went, because it definitely doesn't look like there's $30 million on the screen. And you get moments that really do show the limitations of the director, or the limitations of the production design or the art direction. Uh, the snake farm scene, for instance, looks particularly bad. So did some of the scenes at like the farm with the 9 women. And this is one of those movies where you do have some bits here and there that look okay visually, but a lot of the film is just very tired when it comes to its visual style or its flair. Like it doesn't really always match what you expect from a Pee Wee Herman movie. So what you get is this kind of tired, uh, lazy direction at times, and it's awkward. It makes certain scenes that I don't feel really needed to be awkward appear awkward. And that's really a shame. I honestly wish that a more experienced director was behind the camera for this, especially somebody who worked a little bit more with this kind of zany, uh, over the top family film. You know, that I wish you had somebody else, and I kind of find it hard to believe that they couldn't find someone else, considering it's a Pee Wee Herman movie. I'm pretty sure there were some other filmmakers who were a little bit more established, who had a little bit more under their belts, that would have jumped at the opportunity to work on what ultimately would become Paul Reubens' swan song. So I think it's just kind of a missed opportunity to just get a guy who's just another guy to direct this movie. Um, the script is by Paul Reubens and Paul Rust, and the script is a little disappointing because of the fact that it's just so familiar. It's too familiar. It's very much the same film as Pee-wee's Big Adventure, where Pee-wee goes on some big road trip, but instead of trying to find his bike, he's trying to get to New York City to go to this celebrity's birthday party. And since it's not really a sequel, it just brings things to square one with Pee-wee and does things that just kind of feel out of place, like him working as a cook at a diner and being a member of a flute band called the Renegades. And it's stuff that just doesn't necessarily fit the character. And not in the same way as Big Top Pee-wee, but there's still stuff that this script throws out there that just makes you go, I don't necessarily buy that. And the other one is like, I don't buy Pee-wee being unwilling to leave his town. Like, he seems like a very carefree, happy-go-lucky kind of individual who will just, he'll just go where the mood takes him, that kind of thing. Like, he's just gonna go with the flow. He's not gonna stay rigid and remain in one place because he's afraid of going outside his front door or outside of his small town. That seemed rather forced. Also, it's one of those scripts where the whole conflict is just very weak. Oh, he wants to go to a birthday party. He wants to go to Joe Manganiello's birthday party in New York City. You're like, really? Like, doesn't really seem like that big of a deal. Like, with the bike, you got it because of the way that Pee-wee's Big Adventure and its story in the script established how much he cared for that bike and how much he loved that bike and how much that bike meant to him. And it made more sense that he would go all out and try to get his bike back. Here it's like, okay, he wants to go on this road trip and go to New York and live a little, and you're like, all right, but didn't he already do that? So that's why I don't understand why it's a soft reboot and not a sequel, because it just makes you question a lot of things that happen in this script. You're like, wait a second, we already know that Pee-wee is willing to go on an adventure on a big road trip because he already did that. And when you have little cheeky lines of dialogue that reference Big Top Pee-wee, for instance, it just makes the fact that it's not a sequel all the more glaring and problematic. And another big reason why it makes it glaring and problematic in that regard is you have like a character from the first film who's played by the same actress. Yeah, you have Diane Salinger, who plays Penny again, who was in the first movie. She even says au revoir, Pee-wee, like she did in the first film. And Pee-wee never recognizes her. She never recognizes him either. So it just feels like, oh, there's that character that we liked and Pee-wee had a good rapport with, and oh, they're reunited, but they never recognize one another because it's not really a sequel. Plus, I just feel it's disappointing that like his last adventure is just another road trip. Like, you couldn't have gone a different direction. You couldn't have put Pee-wee in a different setting, or going on a much grander adventure. And it's especially disappointing when you think about the ideas that Paul Reubens had for another Pee-wee movie that never got made in favor of this. He had an idea for a Pee-wee's Playhouse film, which would feature all the characters from the show, and it was going to be a more surreal adventure, maybe kind of like an Alice in Wonderland kind of thing, but with Pee Wee characters and a lot of dream sequences and a lot of moments for a ton of creativity. And I'm like, I wish we got that film. Was even hearing rumors about claymation, and I'm like, that sounds really cool. I wish we got that Pee Wee movie. But instead, we got this, which is not terrible, but it's not great either. And there was another script idea that he was throwing around about a dark Pee Wee movie that would have been interesting. About what if Pee Wee became a big star and it got to his head and he got corrupted by Hollywood, and it was going to be a darker, twisted, more uh, more heavily influenced by black comedy or dark comedy kind of tale. And I love those kind of films, so that would have been interesting. But no, instead you just get this, and right off the bat, you just kind of know things are a little off with the dream sequence, which is a parody of ET, and then it gets to a much better place when you have the whole Rube Goldberg invention opening sequence with Pee Wee and waking up and then going out on the town and riding around in this small miniature car. And I really liked that sequence, by the way. I thought it showed a lot of creativity, and it showed the imagination and the fun that I liked about Pee Wee's Big Adventure. But then when he starts going on this journey to try to go to Joe Manganiello's birthday party, it just doesn't really have the same magic. Like there's some moments where there's some fun scenes here and there, but a lot of it's just kind of forgettable. Like the stuff with the guy who's selling gag gifts, like grocery bags that have magnets on them. The whole scene at the snake farm had a one long running joke that I thought was just really lame. Or speaking of lame running jokes, like he would just scream like a high pitched girl whenever he got scared numerous times. Like the first time it happened, it was kind of unexpected, so it was kind of funny. But then they just overdid that, and then it just became annoying. Um, but yeah, there are some moments, like some of the sequences involving like the 9 women who are at this farm, and how the script showcases them trying to get Pee Wee's affections to the point where it's just extreme stalker behavior. That was funny to me. The scene at the Amish community where he plays with the balloon, and a lot of that really isn't due to the script. It's just Paul Reubens and his mannerisms and what he brings to that. And it was a fun callback to Pee Wee's Playhouse in his show, because there was an episode where and a scene where he played with the same balloon and did the same uh, shtick. And that was the funniest part of the movie to me, was that. And I guess I kind of didn't mind the friendship between Pee Wee and Joe Manganiello, even though it was kind of weird because it's Joe who's playing himself, but it's a fictional version of himself. But there's no other celebrities. He's just the only celebrity. So it was like, okay, so Joe Manganiello is playing himself, but it's like he's the only celebrity that exists in this universe. And I'm just like, why did he have to play himself? Why can't he just play like a different character who's also a movie star? Like, why did it have to be him playing a fictional version of himself? Because it doesn't really seem like it adds anything. It doesn't really add anything to the film when it comes to like satire, when it comes to the script or these other elements. It's just something that's just thrown in there. And there's some other endearing, fun little quirky bits, like the root beer barrels, and how Pee Wee takes out the candy and puts a little straw in it and drinks the barrel like it's an actual barrel of root beer. And it was fun to see Diane Salinger again, and the scene with her in the flying car, but it was honestly a little too short. I think she should have been involved more in the plot. Um, and Pee Wee should have recognized her, and she should have recognized him, and would have made it a lot more special. And the stuff where he falls in the well, there's some really creative, wild bits that happens there where he's stuck in the well when he gets to New York City. And even prior to that, there's a fun little musical number where he's singing about being in New York. He gets trapped in this well, and he starts hallucinating, and that's where you got some of that trippy stuff that I really liked about Pee Wee's Big Adventure. You even get to see like an evil devil Pee Wee in that sequence, which was maybe the closest you ever get to seeing the dark Pee Wee movie. But a lot of it's just very predictable. And there's also this other plot involving this trio of girl gangsters who have switchblades, who basically kidnap Pee Wee. And there's this whole thing where there's this other girl who's named Pee Wee, and there's she's supposed to sympathize with or connect with Pee Wee because they're both called Pee Wee, and it just really didn't do anything for me. And I just didn't really care for that whole angle. And there's other stuff about it that once again, I don't know why it's a story that feels like it's a throwback again. You got these girl gangsters look like they're from a 50s movie, and they got switchblades. But then you have Joe Manganiello, who's playing himself. And there's all these other things about the movie, like the town that Pee Wee is in, that seems like it's lost in time and it's stuck in the 50s. And I'm like, what is up with this 50s obsession? Like, there were elements of that in Pee Wee's Big Adventure, but it clearly took place in modern day. And this is supposed to take place in modern day too, except it also doesn't. It's just bizarre. I don't understand this choice when it comes to the setting of the film. And there's just a lot of aspects of the script that are just there at best. And anything that works about it, anything that's kind of funny, is really due to what Paul Reubens brings to it, and not necessarily the strength of the script. And that's why it's a missed opportunity, because there were other ideas that were more creative, that were more interesting for another Pee Wee movie that Paul wanted to do, but we didn't get any of them. And instead we got this soft reboot of Pee Wee's Big Adventure that isn't as edgy as Pee Wee's Big Adventure, because it's clearly intended for a much younger audience. And on top of that, it just doesn't have the same consistent spark as that film did. Well, it's still trying to be that kind of movie. So when you have some scenes like a flying car randomly, or the bit with the traveling hair design troupe, it just feels like it's kind of forced or out of place. Like, oh, it's trying to be zany and over the top and cartoonish, but then you got this stuff that just it doesn't necessarily stick out. It just feels and plays out like it's just lame. It's just really lame, and like, oh, these African Americans and their big hair, and you're kind of like, that's a little backwards, don't you think? Like, oh, the African Americans, it's funny because they have these big, they love their hair being big, and they do all these designs of their hair, and you're just like, I don't know about that. But Pee Wee and the way that the character is written still kind of makes it work because of the fact that the character is very aloof and seems very innocent. And I do feel the script does a good job with Pee Wee for the most part. You do get why he wants to leave his town after a certain point. You get why he wants to go all this way to go to the birthday party, because he and Joe Magnello do have a connection and they do hit it off. I mean, they're they're finishing each other's sentences in one scene. And it's almost to the point where I wish that those two were together more, because the stuff where Pee Wee's just on his own, just going on these various different misadventures, it's not really as engaging. because I don't think the way that the script is written really gives Pee-wee a lot of chemistry or a lot of moments with any of these other supporting characters. So it's just one of those things where things just kind of happen. And other critics have pointed this out where the film just feels like it's just a bunch of random, loosely connected events featuring Pee Wee Herman. And that really is an accurate way to depict the film and how the script plays out. There's no clear antagonist either, which does not help. There really isn't one at all. There's no villain, there's no anything like that. And that was a really puzzling choice. You couldn't have a single villain? Like somebody who's trying to prevent Pee-wee from going to the party? Like I don't count the three members of the girl gang as an antagonist because they never really are real antagonists. I don't count some of the other characters who try to prevent Pee-wee from going from one place to the next. Don't count them as antagonists either because they're not really clarified as antagonists. And so when you have a film like this and there's all these things that happen, like, and there's no clear antagonist, the story starts to get stale and you're not really as engaged with what's happening. And it does. It just becomes one of those things where it just feels like the story's just kind of spinning its wheels and just kind of going through the motions. And it can become kind of boring. But I wouldn't say completely boring and dull. Like I honestly prefer this a lot more story wise and in general over Big Top Pee Wee. But it's still not what I would consider to be a really solid script, even though it's got its moments. Like I think the whole bromance between Pee Wee and Joe Manganiello, I think that does work. And I think some of the dream sequences are fun. And I think some of the misadventures that he has along the way, specifically the stuff on the farm and a little bit of the Amish scenes, are decent enough. But it really does seem like the best parts of the film are really just stuff that Paul Reubens is just doing without the help of the script. He's just improvising, or stuff that really is more of a production or art design thing. Like the whole Rube Goldberg stuff in the beginning, I highly doubt the script really planned all of that out. So it's just one of those things where, yeah, it's at the end of the day just pretty fair at best, but not anything fantastic. So it's pretty fitting that it takes place mostly in this town called Fairville, because that's really what the script is. It's just fair, just just there, just okay. And the cast is kind of in the same boat. I mean, Paul Reubens, he returns as Pee Wee Herman. This is the conclusion of his redemption arc, and I liked his performance in this. He realized that at his age he couldn't really do the Pee Wee Herman voice at the same capacity as he had done before. And it's not like one of those things with Big Top Pee Wee where him holding things back was more obvious. Here, yeah, he's holding back a little bit, but there's a reason for that. And then it just makes it something that's more tolerable. And I still felt that he brought more energy to this performance than he did in Big Top Pee Wee. He brought a lot more energy to this, a lot more passion. I mean, just the scene where he's playing around with the balloon alone and not even saying a single word has more passion and energy than anything he did in that movie. And you could just really tell that he relished the opportunity to play this character again and essentially say his goodbyes. You know, this was his swan song. This was his swan song for Pee Wee and in a lot of ways his career. So he really gave it everything that he had, and it really does show. And it's an endearing performance, and a big reason why I found the film to be at least decent, or at least a time waster, is because of Paul Reubens and what he brings to the film. Like I legitimately really liked his performance in this. You just tell that he was just having a blast again, playing Pee Wee one more time, and it was infectious at times. It really was because of just his just joy. It was just a very joyous performance. Like it really did come across that way. Joe Manganiello played himself. It was fine too. In fact, I think he and Paul had some really good chemistry. They were fun together, and they had some good rapport, and they definitely did provide a lot of sparks when it comes to their back and forth, and yeah, to the point where I wish it was a buddy film. Like I wish it would they were just together on a road trip. Not this instance where he's out of the film for a good chunk of the movie and Pee Wee's just trying to get to his birthday party. Because I think a good chunk of the fun and the novelty of the film is those two together, and they're not together that much if you really think about it when it comes to the runtime. And I know originally the plan was to have The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, play that role, and that would have been interesting. But I'm glad that that didn't happen because it was nice to see Joe play this kind of role and be this kind of character. The Rock being it seems very too typical, and honestly, I think The Rock would have forced things, and I don't really feel that it would have necessarily come across the same way. The rest of the cast is there, like Jessica Pohly who plays Pepper, and Alia Shawkat who plays Bella, and Stephanie Beatriz who plays Freckles, the three girl gang characters. William Henke who plays this guy named Grizzly Bear Daniels, this weird guy who lives in a cave. That whole scene did nothing for me anyway. It was just random weirdness. Hal Landon Jr. You might recognize he was Ted's dad in Bill and Ted. He plays a farmer in this named Farmer Brown. I liked him. I liked his role in this. He was fun. It was fun to see him again anyway because I remember him from Bill and Ted. Diane Salinger. It was fun to see her again as Penny, but for whatever reason, it's Penny, but in name only. Like I don't get it. I don't understand that choice. You get a you get a couple Mad TV alumni in this. Josh Myers plays one of the members of the Renegades, a band that Pee Wee was a part of. You also have Nicole Sullivan who plays Shelly, who I think is like intended to be Joe Manganiello's agent or his girlfriend or something. So it was fun to see Nicole Sullivan, but at the same time, it felt like you just misused Nicole Sullivan's talents. Like, why couldn't Nicole Sullivan play a wacky character that Pee Wee runs into along the way while he's on his road trip to New York? It's Nicole Sullivan. It's the Vancombe lady. Like, she's one of the most eclectic and talented members of Mad TV. Like, she can play a ton of different types of characters, and like you just have her play just a generic random girlfriend or agent of Joe Manganiello. What a waste of Nicole Sullivan, especially in a Pee-wee movie. Like, would have been really fun to see her act alongside Pee-wee Herman. David Arquette's listed in the cast. He played a DJ in a blink and you miss it scene. Like, I completely even forgot that that was David Arquette. I didn't even know David Arquette was even in this film until I checked the cast. Apparently, he was in the movie, but in a blink and you miss it cameo as a random DJ at Joe Manganiello's party. But yeah, it's like you got a talented enough cast, but they don't really feel like they're given a lot to do. Like even Richard Ryle, who plays Dan, who you might recognize. Richard Ryle's been in a lot of stuff. He was in Office Space. He was in Casino. He was in The Fugitive. He's the guy who runs the diner. He's Dan's Diner. It was fun to see him again as well, but he's not given really a ton to do. So yeah, that's also a little bit of a letdown is that you have a cast that could do a lot more, but they're just held back. I know there's another actress who was in Pee-wee's Playhouse. Um, played like one of the snake, like the lady who works at like the snake farm. Um, but I'm not as familiar with Pee-wee, Pee-wee's Playhouse as other people are. So I don't really remember the actress's name. But yeah, she was featured in the film. So it was a fun little callback to for fans of the show, which I think that's cool. That's definitely cool. That's nice. And the film, in terms of technical elements, like the cinematography by Tim Moore is just kind of okay. The editing by Jeff Buchanan is more the same. The music by Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo, it was pretty decent. Not particularly memorable, but it fit the film fine. It was quirky, which is what you want out of a Pee Wee movie. And it was only like 89 minutes, so it's not like it overstayed its welcome or it was particularly slow paced. But yeah, I will admit, like, it is one of those films like you watch it once and you have a little bit of fun along the way, and it's nice to see Paul Reubens again, and he's bringing as much as he can to it, but he can only do so much with such a generic and this pretty bland plot. And it's just one of those movies where you're like, I'm glad it exists because it enables Paul Reubens to play this character one more time. It enables him to give it Pee Wee a proper send off. But at the same time, it is a little disappointing because it could have been better. There could have been more that could have been done. And it definitely could have been a lot more satisfying and a lot funnier. Because that's another thing. Like, it really wasn't that funny most of the time. There was a couple moments where, it'd make me chuckle, but it wasn't really that funny of a film. So it's just one of those movies where it's sweet. It's got its heart in the right place, and that does go a long way, but it doesn't prevent it from ultimately becoming just another run of the mill, just average adventure. Which, yeah, for the final Pee Wee movie, that's not necessarily ideal. But at the same time, considering how much time that had gone by, it could have been a heck of a lot worse. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of Pee Wee's Big Holiday, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.